Real life.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to yet another episode of the DMA IMA NDB Meet. This is our weekly Sunday meeting, and we have been talking about a lot of things COVID, but I think it's time to move on from COVID and talk about where COVID hit us the most, and that is the inflammatory processes that go on in within most of the population of the country. We have with us Dr. Nidhi Dhawan, who is the Associate Medical Director of ENT and Head of Safety Committee in Shroff Charity Eye Hospital in Daryaganj. But we know her for as an avid reader and doing a lot of research for us and presenting really lovely presentations. And now today she's going to be talking about sleep. And this is another important part of an anti-inflammatory lifestyle that has been introduced to us by Dr. K.K. Agarwal. So without much delay, I would request Dr. Nidhi to please come forward and conduct this session and help us catch up on sleep. Over to you, Dr. Nidhi.
Thank you so much, Dr. Meenakshi. Though there was this last week, I could not complete what we started the week before on sleep. And we had seen that IL-6, TNF-alpha, and nuclear factor kappa-beta pathways are activated by sleep deprivation. We're going to kind of round it off today. And as Dr. Meenakshi said, it's time to move on beyond COVID, but also it is time to recap on what has really happened in the last 2 years and take our lessons as to how we go forward from here. Largely, I feel like COVID has run its own course. It's not as if human intervention has done much to change the course of the pandemic, and we can in our own inflated sense of self say vaccines did this or therapeutics did this, but it has largely run its own course. And just like the previous pandemic at the beginning of the 20th century, the one in the beginning of the 21st is kind of now withering out and will largely stay in the population as pockets of emerging epidemics, if at all. So we'll do a brief recap of what has happened in the last 2 years and how we should move forward. We will recap on the COVID situation in the world right now. And if you look at the March 2nd figures, look at UK at 620 cases per million, US at 173 cases per million, and India at 6.5 cases per million. Now, we could say that this is low testing, but kitni low? The population of India is about 4 times the population of US and about 60 times the population of UK. And there has been a strange blackout of what has really happened in India. There are lessons for us over here. We'll come to that in a bit. If you look at US, here you see about 50,000 cases every day, and the 7-day average being 55. US is significantly on the way down, and it is at the tail end of the wave curve. Look at UK, 44,000 cases every day, 7-day average 63,000. Again, sort of at the tail end of the curve. They're showing a up and down kind of situation. Israel, 8,500 with a 7-day average of 8,800, again at the tail end of the curve. Now look at these countries. These countries are all, UK and Israel are highly vaccinated, often triple boosted or even quadruple boosted. US has a strange situation, yes, a little different from UK and Israel, and we'll get into that in a bit. South Africa came to the limelight with the last variant of interest, 1,800 cases, 7-day average 1,600. So they seem to be, again, not really hitting the baseline, but they are at the tail end of the wave curve. Why it is important to see Australia, Hong Kong, Singapore, New Zealand, these are the countries which maintained a zero COVID policy right till the end. We have been on this platform saying that that is not viable. And there is a reason why that is not viable. The population that stays naive will not get educated about the virus. The virus is not what is killing humans. What is killing humans is the inappropriate immune thrombotic response to a pathogen that the human body does not recognize. So you find that the countries which have maintained a zero COVID policy right till the end are now not having as comfortable a time as the countries which have seen the varying waves in the past. Look at New Zealand. It's shooting up, and it is going up and beyond. Now, this, in a way, is going to do the job that the vaccine coverage not being complete left out. Singapore, as yet, we don't see a significant drop in the wave. If you find, Singapore has also been very aggressive about zero COVID policy. The vaccines they have used are largely Pfizer, just like the US. Look at Hong Kong. The end doesn't seem in sight. 56,000 new cases with a 7-day average of 38,000, going up. Why it is important to see Russia with the present crisis, Russia, Ukraine, Romania, Poland, these countries have become important because people who are going to be leaving these countries and getting into either their motherlands, homelands, or into the rest of Europe, which is largely over with COVID, we need to figure out whether they're going to bring in fresh waves with the mobility. So Russia, close to 100,000 cases every day. And with the war, the COVID situation would take a backseat. We don't know if this is the real number. Testing would have decreased. Coming back to India, you look at India's population and you look at India's numbers. There is something that India has done, whether it is by design or it is by accident, which has helped us. And we can keep ranting about how we are a poor country that has not been testing adequately, that has not been treating this. I mean, there is a lot of polarization and politics around it. And particularly some of the first world countries have a hard time digesting that India may have actually done something different. You look at this for comparison. This is where India is. That bottom green line is where India is. Now, I have magnified this part of the graph, which is from December, January 2021 to March 2022, so that you can actually see the differences. Look at this. This is Israel. Look at how it has gone up despite 4 doses of the vaccine. Look at New Zealand. If you see, New Zealand opened up somewhere around here, around February end. It opened up, and you see how New Zealand is going up with no end to that curve in sight. Hong Kong opened up around the same time. Look at how the curve is going up, and they're going up in a sort of parallel fashion. Look at Israel. Look at Denmark. Denmark opened up around here, I think around the end of January. They were on the way up. They decided to open up. Despite that, it kind of stayed static over a period of about a month or so, and then started coming down. This is just how the virus would behave in a population given the population's demographic features. Human intervention has not done much except mitigate a little bit of misery. Looking at new cases per capita in the various regions of the world, look at Africa. Again, we can rave and rant about how little Africa tests, what is their status as far as medical coverage is there, vaccine coverage is there, their medical facilities. But look at how Africa is right at the bottom, close to the baseline. Look at US and Canada. And look at Europe. These are the countries which claim to be advanced, scientifically, logically based. The kind of polarization we have seen here. Latin America, somewhere down there. Asia Pacific. So we find that there are factors that need to be decoded. We can't just say that okay, so we would need to decode this. Now, Omicron comprehensively is all over the globe. In a way, that is a good thing. Intrinsically, this virus has pathogenic features which are different from the previous variants. It has less inflammatory potential, perhaps also because a large swath of population all over the world is exposed to the virus either by infection or by vaccine, and that would result in a little bit of recognition of the virus. That would be one factor why Omicron has probably caused less pathology. The other is that it causes less syncytia formation, doesn't infect the lung as easily as the previous variants, and hence the critical functions were less affected in Omicron wave. That's not to say that this virus was otherwise any different from any of the previous viruses. This still is SARS-CoV. If you look at hospital admissions, we don't have hospital admission data on our world in data for India. But if you look at the countries which claim to be scientifically following the pandemic. Look at UK, this pink line. Look at Denmark. When Denmark opened up, their hospitalizations went up a little bit, and then they came down. Look at US. Now US seems to be here. This is what is US. Seems to be now comprehensively coming down. Israel has gone through waves of admissions coming down. These are the countries which have dealt with the pandemic in their own ways, but it seems like the pandemic has also dealt with them in its own way. Look at the daily new, okay, so those were the daily new deaths, and we saw that even that US seems to be doing worse than the other countries. US has had a graph which has, throughout the pandemic, been worse than other countries. There have been some scientific inquiry around this. Even in the Omicron wave, US did not perform as well as any of these other so-called advanced countries. The reasons they say is, one, that the share of population fully vaccinated in US is lower than these other high-income countries. And the other is that the booster in US has been lower, which is why now US is pushing blanket boosters for everyone who is eligible. And by them, eligibility is just age. So everybody more than 5 years of age should get boosted. Now, the other factors which perhaps have contributed to US's poor performance are that it has a large share of aging or aged population, which is unvaccinated. The share of unvaccinated aging population in US is about 20%. But if we look at it, Japan has about 30%. Germany also has about 20%, 2% here or there. So that's, by comparison, that really doesn't hold why US should be performing worse than these countries. Now, this seems to be what is tipping the balance for US. The share of adult population that has obesity in the US is close to 40%, whereas in Japan, it is about 4%. The population that is not fully vaccinated in US is about 40%. In Japan, it is about 20%. Now, though large European countries have done worse than US is seeing, the only large countries which have done very poorly are Russia, Ukraine, Poland, and I'm reading this directly from a New York Times article, verbatim. Russia, Ukraine, Poland, Greece, and the Czech Republic. This is a report dated 2nd of March. If you are looking at the Russia-Ukraine crisis, you are looking at Russia, Ukraine, Poland as having performed even worse than US. You are looking at people who are going to be reseeding the globe with the virus, which may not be as bad a thing right now, because most of the countries are already now exposed to the virus either by vaccination or by prior seroconversion. US stands out as having a relatively high fatality rate. Mitigate that thing about high fatality by saying relatively high fatality. There has been more loss than anyone wanted, actually. Even one death is one too many, and US has not been in a rosy position throughout the pandemic. Now, if we look at that one factor that we have been examining, contributing to inflammation, we'll take up obesity next, perhaps. But if we look at one factor that in the last 2 weeks we have been examining, look at where India is. India is that top line. India sleeps the best in the world. So, and there is no one single thing that you can say is what is working in the favor or working against a particular country. There are a lot of cumulative factors which come in to shape the epidemic curve for any country. So interestingly, about 50% of UK population feel they don't get enough sleep. About 70% of US population feels that they don't get enough sleep. And about 70% of Indian population feels they get enough sleep. They get enough sleep. Now, those ratios are exactly the opposite of each other. Also, our festivals have been generally the time when, there is a cluster of days when we do nothing but celebrate and meet families, friends. In the last 2 years, we haven't been doing it, but these are all programmed into the calendar of the year as counter-inflammatory celebrations, which allow you to just completely relax and unhook from the world. So this was very interesting. I thought that India sleeps the best in the world, whereas insufficient sleep is a public health epidemic in the US, and that is from CDC. So is it one of the contributing factors to why US has suffered similar death rates in each of the waves, whereas other countries have performed slightly better in the Omicron wave? So US has an aging population. There is a high rate of comorbidity. There is high obesity. And their serving sizes are huge. It's a consumerist society which consumes a lot. And India is on the opposite end of the spectrum. And this is not to criticize any country. It is just that we have to figure out what could have not worked in favor of a particular nation and perhaps could have worked in the favor of another nation. There has been a strange blackout to India's performance in the pandemic, and I think we need to highlight that with India's population, we seem to have done okay. If you look at Australia, look at New Zealand, these are the countries which followed a zero COVID policy. These are the countries which have gone up. Look at Africa. If you see Africa, Kenya, 33 cases, Nigeria, 40, Ethiopia, 47, Seychelles, 48, Ghana, 120, Algeria, 114. Do you see these numbers? These are poorly served, marginalized countries that have not got the vaccine, which have relatively poor medical facilities, which have an epidemic of AIDS, which is a public health problem for them, HIV, which decreases immunity, and yet these countries have done well. One reason could be that they have a lifestyle which is closer to the nature. They are not as wired into the global system of technology. The other could be that they have a younger population, that the young immune system is more capable of a robust response. The third could be that they are the ivermectin belt. The fourth could be that there is not much movement between borders in these countries. The fifth could be that they're not that kind of tourist destinations that people from the developed West go and seed with newer pathogens. So there are a lot of things which could have worked in these countries, but definitely something did. And maybe all of them worked together. Look at Europe. 159,000, 130,000, 74,000, 54,000, 42,000. This is as of 2nd of March. The averages they are saying have been data revised down to 20th May, which might affect the rolling averages because uske pehle the alpha peak was not factored in. So they have factored in the delta peak, but they haven't factored in the initial Wuhan and the alpha peaks. So look at these numbers. And look at Middle East. Saudi Arabia, UAE, these are countries with more than 95% vaccination rates. Look at how they have performed in each of the waves. Omicron has no respect for vaccination. It has no respect for a closed border. It has no respect for anything. Omicron has proved to the world that it is inevitable and that we can live in the self-inflated glory of being able to deal with a pandemic, but it will deal with us in the way it deals fit. However, we are fortunate that Omicron has caused less damage than it could have. Look at China on the way up with a zero COVID policy. Numbers, reliability, we don't know. Look at South Korea, zero COVID policy, numbers up. Look at Singapore, zero COVID policy, numbers going up. Look at India. Look at Bangladesh. I was very impressed with the Bangladesh representative in yesterday's National Medical Association's meet that happens every Saturday morning. He was asking very pertinent questions from the US representative. He said in the recent state of the, whatever that address that Biden did, there was no masking, there was enough crowding, there were speeches, there was singing. And US is telling the world that they should behave responsibly. What is the message that we are sending across? And that is a question that we have to ask and have answered. We hear a lot about how, poor India, we hit 400,000 in a day. But when US hit 10 lakhs in a day, the same press was very quiet. We can't be treating this with differing yard scales. For the sake of future pandemics, we need to know what has gone wrong or right where in the world. Now, if you look at India and if you look at that part of Africa, which we've been talking about, the common factors between these two populations are they are youngish populations. They have had no hesitation to use ivermectin, and they treat what they see. We are, as a population, closer to nature than the swaths of purple that you see or the oranges that you see. Look at what is the percentage of population which is currently fully covered with vaccines. Africa, practically no coverage. You look at, it's like between 0 to maybe 20%. Look at India, it is between 50 to 70%. So vaccination may have helped us, but that is not a mitigating factor for for Africa. If we track it across the world, we find that as of February 28th, about 65% of the global population has received at least one dose of the vaccine. Fully vaccinated would stand around about 45 to 50%. About 20% have received additional boosters. These have been in countries like Israel, UK, the ones which claim to have dealt with it in scientific manner. So you look at the ivermectin belt of Africa, less than 20%. We hear a lot about how it is a horse pill, forgetting that WHO has made this medicine available for large swaths of population to find a solution to a crippling blindness that this belt in Africa suffered through ages, through centuries, and successfully so. Look at the world map as of 28th February. This is where COVID is. This is where COVID is. And this is where COVID is disappearing. Look at the deaths splattered all over the globe. Now, percentage of people who have received boosters, if boosters are what are making the difference. 66%, 62%, 62%. These are, there is somebody who's, Dr. Vinay, Aapka, thank you so much. So these are the countries which have given boosters to more than 50% of their population. And these are the countries which have performed so well in the Omicron wave, right? UK, Ireland, Germany, Portugal, Belgium, South Korea. You have seen the graphs. Which vaccines have the greatest global reach? Now, why this is important is, when we talk vaccines, all the literature coming from the West is talking about mRNA vaccines. We are not talking about these small swatches or even this one. We are not talking about any other vaccine platform than mRNA platforms, which is going to create a bias either for or against. Recent news that the mRNA vaccines, reverse transcript into DNA in the liver cells in the nucleus was concerning enough. The the mitigating factor was that it was cell culture. It was not found in vivo. It was found in vitro. So these. Then there was one paper that I read which said that Moderna had patented the DNA sequence for the furin cleavage site on the spike protein in 2016. All this creates an atmosphere of distrust. And if we come back to India now, let's see what our situation is. So comprehensively coming down, for a country our size, we are now doing pretty well, despite all the electioneering. The positivity rates are again coming down. The one from which Omicron took off was 0.68. As of today is 0.74. But the graph is on its way down. Active case trajectory, we are less than 100,000 today. If you look at death rates, look at India, 289 deaths as of 4th of March. US, 1,800, 1,900 deaths as of 4th March. UK, 110 deaths as of 4th March. India's population is 10 times that of UK. UK's population is about 65 million and is about 4 times the population of US. So what has India done differently? Are there any lessons for us, for the world? Is there something that we can do for the betterment of humanity? So India's pandemic response in itself is a case study. And I think we should rope in some scientists to do that. Human effort has had very little effect on the natural cycle of the virus. However, what could have worked in India, perhaps, has been their testing strategy, their risk stratification strategy. So we realized very early that we needed vaccine coverage for the elderly and for the frontline workers first. We, even on our platform, have promoted early treatment strategies so that we don't let a mild illness become moderate and we don't let a moderate illness become severe. We have been exploring off-label use by going back to the basics, by really seeing the biochemistry, by seeing the pathology and the pathogenesis of the virus. Our vaccination strategy has rolled out to the best of our economic and logistic feasibility. As a country, we have a supremely successful vaccination program for the pediatric age group. We piggy rode on that one and have had reasonable success with this. The population demographic profile was perhaps something that worked in our favor, that we are a young population with 60% of the population being less than 20 years of age. And 60% of the population, hence, having low load of comorbidities. And that's not zero load, but low load. We used everything in our arsenal. We did not say no to counter-inflammatory lifestyles. We did not say no to Ayurveda, or we did not say no to yoga. We did not say no to, we basically tried everything, and if it worked, we took it on. The other thing, which at a very basic level has worked in our favor, is there has been clear, transparent, and uniform messaging. We haven't had, even though we've had pockets of polarization, we haven't had swatches of polarization which have made people behave antagonistically to each other. We have tried colchicine, steroids, doxycycline, HCQS, ivermectin, oral anticoagulants. We have covered large swatches of population, and we have a relatively lower comorbidity profile. Now, a recent study from Thailand had proved, and I'm putting that in air quotes, that ivermectin is not significantly beneficial to improve outcomes in COVID. Interestingly, the figures in the paper were the reverse. The figures in the paper were that so if it was 10 cases in the ivermectin arm who progressed to severe and 2 out of those died, in the non-ivermectin arm, there were 100, out of which 50 died. But so you can treat with statistics whatever you want to and proclaim whatever you want to. And I think we need a scientist to really look at a paper and see what the statistics are talking and whether those decisions that this paper is purporting to report are actually what is happening on the ground. Counter to that paper, now this is a paper which has appeared on March 2022. So this is like March is now. It's in Elsevier, which is a peer-reviewed journal. Treatment with ivermectin is associated with decreased mortality in COVID-19 patients, analysis of a national federated database. This is a paper from United States of America. It's a horse pill. Anybody who's giving it is not a doctor. You need to have your head examined. The kind of nonsense that we have heard really makes scientific discourse impossible to have. I'm willing to accept that ivermectin is not magic. And I'm willing to accept that the vaccines also haven't done magic. As I said, the virus has run its own natural course. What we have done is just mitigated our losses. We haven't cut our losses. Again, interestingly, now this is an eye-opener. You know, when you talk about, let's see, remdesivir, one course of remdesivir costs $3,000 on the approved list. Trials. So this is very few trials. These are more number of trials. Look at Paxlovid. Despite low number of trials and a $700 price tag, Paxlovid is approved. Monoclonal antibodies. Melatonin, there is no approval. It costs less than $1. Okay, look at molnupiravir, $700 price tag. Is it, I mean, really, should we not be seeing what is happening? If we look at what has happened in India, you see a very different picture. You see that we have high recovery rates, that we are using back to basics medicines, which cost less than $1 in their price terms. And we are using them based on science of what they will do in the body. We have covered, look at this, we have covered about 42 lakh healthcare workers with a precautionary dose, about 63 lakh frontline workers with the precautionary dose. about 99 lakh geriatric population with a precautionary dose. We are still giving close to 25 lakh vaccines every 24 hours. So we are not anti-vaxxers. We do realize the value of the vaccine. Delhi, if you see, with its population 320 cases, we have now stopped doing pre-operative COVID screening in our hospital. Maharashtra, again, Kerala, still in thousands, but comprehensively on the way down. Uttar Pradesh, despite the electioneering, comprehensively down. This is a graph that I really want to highlight. We have discussed this graph in our, I think, last to last meet. If you look at this, the risk of getting COVID, if you have no previous COVID and if you do not have a vaccine, this is definitely very high. You are 16 to 20 times more likely to get COVID if you are not vaccinated than if you are. This is where the cluster of those who have either previous infection or have previous vaccination or who have had both. This is where the cluster is. If you are vaccinated and you have had a previous COVID, you have the best immunity. If you are only vaccinated and you do not have previous COVID, you still cluster around the same, but you're not as good as hybrid immunity. Whereas people who are unvaccinated but have had previous COVID have better immunity, close to the hybrid immunity. Now, that is not to say that you should go ahead and get infected. That is only to say that use whatever is in your arsenal to improve outcomes without fighting about where that is happening. Use the science. Now let's catch up with sleep. So how well do you sleep? If you feel sleepy at work or watching a movie or even driving, and you find that you're not able to catch up with sleep in the daytime, you are not sleeping well. A lot of people have really forgotten what it is actually like to have normal sleeping pattern. And I had taken on this challenge that March is going to be my sleep repair month. So for the last whole week, on 5 days, I was in bed by 10:30. So 2 days, last 2 days, making this presentation, last night I slept at 3 o'clock. So I am guilty, but I'm going to try and repair this also. What does sleep deprivation do to the body? It impairs memory. So your recall of recent events as well as recent past becomes impaired. Concentration and focus are impaired. Mood becomes irritable and depressed. Immunity is suppressed. Libido is suppressed. Diabetes and poor sugar control is raised. Hypertension, weight gain, heart disease are increased. There is even a disturbed balance and hence increased number of falls and accidents. Sleep deprivation affects practically every system in the body. Every system in the body. If you are sleep deprived for 24 hours, that is stage 1 sleep deprivation, according to international standards of sleep. You feel tired, irritable, your decision making is impaired, and the reaction time is slowed. Now, interestingly, 24 hours without sleep is equivalent to having a blood alcohol level of 0.1%. This is over the legal limit in most countries in the world. This is what we expect our young doctors to do day in and day out in their 24-hour duties. Sleep deprivation of 36 hours, stage 2, the risks increase, drowsiness is more, there is difficulty in concentrating, there is increased appetite because the body is now in that crisis mode. So there is increased appetite and there is increased cardiovascular risk that significantly happens around this time. Interestingly, Japanese have a word for death by overwork, or karoshi. If you look at this graph, South Korea has maximum number of people who work longer than 49 hours in a week. Hong Kong, Indonesia, Japan has the highest percentage. Japan is not figuring on this, I can't see it. But all these countries are having a significant national sleep debt. And the effects of sleep deprivation on women are higher than that on men. If you haven't had sleep for 48 hours, stage 3, then irrespective of how much caffeine you take, how much stimulants you take, there are periods of micro sleep that happen. You cannot help it. There is depersonalization. So your personality starts to change. You become irritable and aggressive. There is declining immune function, increased confusion, and there is altered cognition. You start hallucinating. Hallucinations become severe at around 72 hours. There is disordered cholesterol metabolism, rising uncontrolled irritability, intense urge to sleep, and increased heart rate and personality changes. The lack of sleep hurts the brain in all areas. So people who think that they can get by without sleep before an exam because they have to complete the course, there is difficulty in learning new material, and there is information is processed slower, problem solving skills decline, memory decline. So there is poorer recall also during the exam. The frontal lobe, there is difficulty in focusing, creativity declines. So you are not performing optimally. Vision becomes worse. Speech becomes slurred. So it affects all areas of the brain. My father used to say a very interesting thing, always, and which is what I try to tell all the kids that I see, that if you study 1 hour every day for 365 days, you have one academic year, you have 365 hours. But if you study for 10 hours a day for a month before the exam, you have only 300 hours. And for those 10 hours, you have to sit down to study, say at around 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, and then carry on till about 9 o'clock in the evening, given yourself a lunch break or a breakfast break or something, which is inhuman. It's very difficult. So less sleep has 100 times doubling rate of heart disease, 200% rise in cancers, 20% increased risk of death, and about 14 pounds of obesity per year. Wherever you see nuclear factor kappa beta, think inflammation, think TNF alpha, think IL-2. Sleep deprivation actually activates the nuclear factor kappa beta translocation. And not only in the cholinergic basal forebrain, but also the rest of the body. If there is psychological stress and there is environmental stress, there is hypothalamic dysregulation and melatonin secretion decreases. Now, this causes disturbed sleep, and there is increased nocturnal sympathetic activity, which raises resting blood pressure, resting heart rate, coronary heart disease. It also increases insulin resistance and decreased insulin uptake in the body. So it predisposes to disordered sugar metabolism. And this has been shown in glucose tolerance test in sleep deprived, otherwise healthy adults. So if there are any changes in the circadian rhythm, the inflammatory metabolic markers are raised, and the melatonin suppresses nuclear factor kappa beta. It suppresses ROS, whereas all of these norepinephrine, epinephrine, adenosine, metabolic waste, they all heighten the nuclear factor kappa beta, which raises even the CRP. So sleep deprived adults have higher CRP than sleep satisfied adults. So if we are looking at altered circadian rhythms causing their effects, stroke, hypertension, diabetes, chronic heart disease, obesity, all of them can be linked to the central axis. Appetite is increased. We discussed this in the last talk because the ghrelin is increased and leptin is decreased. So what are the markers of sleep deprivation? There is increased von Willebrand factor. There is decreased glucose tolerance and increased insulin resistance. So HbA1c is raised. There is endothelial dysfunction. There is increase in adhesion molecules like IL-6. There is also hyperlipidemia. HDL is raised, LDL is decreased, CRP is raised, leptin is decreased, cortisol is raised. Sodium retention is there, so there is higher sodium also. So what are the markers of inflammation in a sleep deprived adult? These are either metabolic or endocrine. IL-6 is raised in both men and women. CRP is raised in both men and women. TNF alpha is raised only in men, which is a very interesting thing. I don't know why. IL-1 beta and IL-17 are raised. Raised fasting insulin, decreased glucose tolerance, disturbed glucose metabolism with a raised HbA1c, raised fibrinogen, increased coagulability and clotting, decreased albumin. So a very, very simple test that can be done is the fibrinogen albumin ratio. The fibrinogen albumin ratio is altered because albumin is decreased, so this ratio starts to rise more than 1. Leukocytosis, particularly neutrophilia. Monocytosis, so the inappropriate inflammatory reaction. What can you do to repair your sleep? If you are feeling like you're entering into phases of micro sleeps, that you don't know what happened in the few seconds past, take a power nap. Sleep a few extra hours, cover your sleep, but try to practice sleep hygiene. Go to bed a little earlier. 8 o'clock I don't think is possible for anybody today, but well, 10 o'clock, 10:30, 11, whatever time you think is, follow that fixed time. Keep the temperature low. So this is a counterintuitive thing for most of us, at least for me it is. I like to keep my room warm, but I have realized that if you keep your room slightly colder, you sleep better. Keep it dark. So it's not just about the eyes, the whole body has light sensors. So if there is any light which is filtering into your sleeping space, including the light of your phone and your laptop, you will have decreased melatonin and altered REM, non-REM ratios of your sleep. Avoid caffeine at night. For me, again, a very difficult thing, but for this whole week, I have not had coffee at night. Though I famously say that both my father and me, we have a degree of caffeine metabolism that allows us to sleep in the 5 minutes after we have coffee. Talk to your doctor. So a lot of people that I have seen who come with post-COVID problems have sleep disturbances. And the easiest way to fix that is not sedative hypnotics. The easiest way to fix that is melatonin. Because these people are in melatonin dysregulation. And now as I finish, I want to show you something very interesting, which I don't know if I'll be able to, where is that? This, so there was this video of Bill Gates. I don't know if any of you have seen it. Bill Gates said very interestingly that, I think this is the one, Mr. Bill Gates in Australia. Let me. You saw that? Mr. Bill Gates, who is claiming to be the guardian of health for the globe. And he says, sadly, the virus itself has done a better job than the vaccines. I mean, what is so sad about it? So I think I'll stop sharing here and then let's. Dr. Sanjeev is asking, does sleep deprivation trigger sleep apnea? I think sleep apnea triggers sleep deprivation, but sleep control is a bidirectional control. So both enhance each other. But it was interesting, you know, when people who claim to be based in science and who tell others that they're using horse pills and then say, sadly, the virus itself has done a better job. It's, well, I think the less said, the better. Over to you, Dr. Meenakshi.
Yeah, I think the sad part is the kind of damage we have incurred, and I think that's what he's referring to, I guess. I mean, that's the only interpretation that I can think of. The floor is now open for questions. So if anyone wishes to discuss anything pertaining to the topic, we welcome your questions now. I don't think there are any more questions in the chat box. That was a great presentation, Dr. Nidhi, you're on mute. That was a great.
Sorry, Meenakshi, I like what Dr. Virender is saying. So, you know, the last thing that we did, sleep number 1, I told my son to watch it. I told my daughter to watch it. And that's what Dr. Virender is saying. Can I get a recording of this on my WhatsApp so that I can share it with my children who keep awake till early in the morning? That is very true.
So I think that as medical students, we've all done this. And I remember when I was still in med school, one of my very senior professors, he once told me that, you know, there will be a time when you will just switch from being a nocturnal animal to a diurnal animal, and you will start, you know, waking up early. And when you do that, it's going to be a revelation. And only after I, you know, sort of associated with Dr. K.K. Agarwal did that switch happen. And it's genuinely life-changing. The amount of work that you can get done in 20 minutes early in the morning, you cannot achieve for like, even for 2 hours. Like, even if you're working for 2 hours late in the night, it does not work. So I used to always say that. So there were some articles that I had read in med school, and I used to argue saying that there are some people who just are built differently and they work better at night. And I always used to think that I belong to that category of people. But as I said, when this change happened, it was quite a revelation, just like my professor had promised. So, Dr. Virendra Gupta, this link we will share with you. It's live on YouTube and Facebook. We will share the link with you. If you're not there on the group, if you can just message me your number, we will share the link with you.
Dr.
So,
Nidhi,
yes,
could
Dr.
I
Wadhwa, go ahead.
add a little bit to the whole thing? Excellent presentation as always. I am in the process of reading a book on sleep medicine. It's by Dr. Matthew Walker. He's a neurologist. And I will request everyone to go through it. It's an eye-opener.
Sir, the name of the book, sir, if you could put in the chat box.
I'll put it in the chat box. It is, Why We Sleep, The New Science of Sleep and Dreams by Dr. Matthew Walker. And, after reading it, I realized how much injustice I have done to myself as a doctor and to my medical students and to my children as a teacher and as a father. I personally feel that there are quite a few things in it which we can practice ourselves, and those are near and dear ones and our patients, of course, and it will make a lot of difference to them, because sleep is an important facet of life which we tend to ignore, particularly as medical professionals. So I'll put it in the chat box, and I'll request everyone to spare some time and go through this book. It is definitely it'll be worth a read for everyone.
Sir, interestingly, there is another book, and I'll put that also in the WhatsApp group, which, so there is a 19-year-old college boy who's an athlete, who in one of his runs, as he's turning a corner, just falls down, and it is discovered that his bones are the age of an 80-year-old man. So that's like rock bottom low. Now, an athlete who is training well and who should be in the prime of his health at the age of 19 finds out that his body has aged to the age of 80. So he's also written a book, and I'm forgetting the name of the book, but his book is also about, he makes the claim that sleep is more important than nutrition and exercise put together.
Absolutely. And, he has also cited some patients in this book who could not sleep. There was a genetic basis, and they died ultimately, after a certain time, because of complications affecting the entire body.
And interestingly, all the countries who have performed badly in the pandemic have poor sleep habits.
How much Mr. Modi is doing injustice with him?
Sir, yes, हम कह सकते हैं. We totally can say that he's doing injustice, and we can also say that we are grateful to him for taking on our sleep debt so that we can sleep in peace. But there are very few who will agree to that.
No, he has been advised by the doctors to, improve on his sleep patterns.
Yes.
But he has been doing it for a very long time, and we have to agree that, genetically some people may be different. They may be requiring less duration of sleep, or the quality of sleep might be better. So there must be something.
So there is something called yoga nidra, which there is we will not listen to our own scriptures, but there is an American who's done this study. He's an ophthalmologist. He's I think Huberman Labs. So he's done this study that yoga nidra can actually reduce the time that you need to sleep for the same recovery that you would need in a routine sleep. So maybe Modi's doing that, possibly.
Dr. Nidhi,
Hanji.
here.
Ji.
Actually, the link I had put for daily yoga,
Ji.
no one has come. And on Saturdays, we all do Yog Nidra, post only one round of Surya Namaskar. Follow.
Okay. So how long does
we do Kriya.
How long does that Yoga Nidra last?
See, only for 10 to 15 minutes. Then you go to sleep if you wish, right?
Okay. Okay.
This can be done, learned, self-practiced, and at night, just to sleep, you can do it. It's PMR, what they call in physiotherapy, progressive muscular relaxation, is Yog Nidra. Chetan Nidra या जागृत निद्रा जिसको बोलते हैं.
I've put that book also. Sean Stevenson is that man. Sleep Smarter by Sean Stevenson.
Again, share the link. So those who are doing it, if you only want Yog Nidra, come on Saturday, 6:40 to 7:50. Only on Saturday we are doing. Okay.
Okay.
Madam, you have mentioned about the HIV infection in the Africa patient.
Yes.
Is there any role of the HIV virus with the COVID virus?
So, generally speaking, if you have one virus already in the body, another virus possibly doesn't co-infect. But HIV is unique in that it decreases the immunity of the body, so it makes you more prone to infections. Now, why I mentioned that was that despite an epidemic of HIV, which decreases population immunity, Africa has had very low numbers. So there must be something which is protecting Africans despite that immune challenge. And I think some of it has to do with the lifestyle. Africans have a very, very close to nature lifestyle. They have huge open areas, grasslands and forests, and their cities are very small, surrounded by forests. So they still have a very close to nature lifestyle. And I think I would encourage at least this group. आप खुद देखिए अपना highly sensitive CRP कराइए on the days that you are working harder or that you are staying awake longer, and then get your CRP done after a vacation you have taken in the mountains or by the sea, and see if there is any difference. I mean, proof of the pudding is in the eating of it. Agar aapko lagta hai, and I think niklega, unless somebody is following an absolutely counter inflammatory lifestyle like मैम जस्ट सेड कि आप योगा करो, योगा निद्रा करो, अगर आप कुछ रोज कर रहे हैं जो आपकी बॉडी में आती हुई इन्फ्लेमेशन को कम कर रहा है, then your CRP might be less. Otherwise, sleep is one big factor in urban life which is causing inflammation, or sleep deprivation is.
Okay.
I don't think there are any more questions. Some statements about the art of living. Art of living tells 4 things must in life: breathe, breath, food, sleep, and knowledge. Otherwise, we may all fall sick. And I think that's what we have been discussing on these Sunday meetings. So on that note, I'd like to call it a day. And we'll end the session now. Thank you everyone for joining in and keeping Dr. KK's mission and goals alive. And a big thank you to Dr. Nidhi for being the torchbearer for this purpose. We'll be back next week with another show. Until then,